Abraham Lincoln is held up as an example of perseverance. He was born on a farm in a one-room log cabin, son of a farmer. Lincoln faced defeat throughout his life. Perhaps you've seen a list of all the personal and professional failures that he had before he reached the White House. He lost 8 elections. He twice failed in business. He even suffered a nervous breakdown. What's not mentioned in those lists was the perseverance that he displayed in marriage. Unlike Lincoln, who was poor, Mary Todd came from an aristocratic family, and she was high maintenance, to say the least. Shortly after their wedding, she told Lincoln that everyone who was quality lived in a 2-story house. Lincoln never agreed to build that for her, and so she waited until he was away for several weeks and contracted with a carpenter to build it. Her temper tantrums made retaining hired help extremely difficult. Lincoln's reported to giving the girls an extra dollar each week as a way of compensating for their frustrations with the First Lady. After one eruption between Mary and a maid, Lincoln quietly patted the girl on the shoulder and said, "Stay with her, Maria, stay with her." When a salesman called on the White House and was verbally assaulted by Mary, he marched right up to the Oval Office to complain. And that was a different time back then. Lincoln listened calmly to the salesman and then replied, "You can endure for 15 minutes what I've endured for 15 years. Her spending sprees were infamous. On one such an event, she bought hundreds of pairs of gloves. She went way over the budget Congress gave her for redecorating the White House, and this was in the time of war, by the way. Her lack of financial discipline caused Lincoln a lot of problems. Presidents were not as well off back then as they are today. Lincoln endured numerous indignities at the hands of his wife. On one occasion, she threw coffee in his face, and this was in public. Lincoln's inability to control his wife was a public relations nightmare for the White House. Things really started to fall apart after they lost Willie, who was Mary's favorite son. Mary Todd was emotionally unstable to begin with, and the ensuing grief after his passing began to crack her already fragile psyche. It became more and more difficult for her to control her hysterics. It was in the middle of this personal and marital upheaval that Lincoln faced the most difficult period of his political career. Gary Thomas writes about this. It was in the aftermath of this tremendous grief, losing his son, and distraction, watching his wife fall apart, that Lincoln was called on to give the speech that would mark him for posterity. Lincoln's political life was as precarious at this point as was his home life. As the Civil War dragged on, Abe's political favor crashed. When told that the president would address the crowd at Gettysburg, gathering to commemorate the fallen soldiers, a fellow politician scoffed, "Let the dead bury the dead." Shortly after Lincoln left for Gettysburg, his son Tad became ill, and this once again intensified Mary's hysterics, as she was newly reminded of the son she had lost less than 2 years earlier. With all the distractions at home, Lincoln was able merely to scribble out a few notes as he left for Pennsylvania. In this highly emotional moment, Lincoln could be forgiven for delivering his words with less than powerful rhetoric. One reporter described Lincoln's delivery as a sharp, unmusical treble voice. The applause was scattered and restrained, so much so that Lincoln believed he had failed miserably. He leaned over and told a friend it was a flat failure. The people are disappointed. But the words were true and genuine, and they were moving and powerful. And as the newspapers recorded them, without Lincoln's understandable gloom coloring them, the nation was inspired as never before. The Gettysburg Address is one of the most famous speeches ever delivered on American soil, and those words would eventually be carved in stone, accompanying Lincoln into posterity. It may be cliche to say this, but it's still true. He shone brightest when his personal life was darkest. You know, it's said that behind every great man is a great woman. That's not always true. In the list of the greatest American presidents, Lincoln's name is always near the top. And one such list for first ladies, Mary Todd Lincoln, is credited for being the worst. Gary Thomas argues in his book, Sacred Marriage, that a bad marriage made Lincoln a better man. The connection one can make between Lincoln's marriage and his mission is not difficult. It's easy to see how a man who might quit on a difficult marriage would not have the character to hold together a crumbling nation. Lincoln was virtually obsessed with saving the Union. What better training ground than the difficult marriage that required such tenacity from him? Nick Saban was known for preaching process over results. And this is hard for me as an Auburn grad to admit this. But Nick Saban was right. An athlete should never focus on results, getting his stats, winning the game, winning the championship. He should only focus on the process. What do I need to do every game? What do I need to do every practice, every play to get better? Pay attention to the process, Saban would preach, and the results will take care of themselves. This series that we're looking at this weekend is all about the process God has given us to restore our lives. The passages we've looked at the last couple of days from Ephesians are all about growth spiritually, not about marriage. God is transforming us from the old man that was deceived by the devil, by lusts and passions and temptations, that was old and corrupt and even dead, as Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 2. And now God has infused our lives with new life. He has raised us and seated us with Christ in the heavenly places, and He has promised us to fill us with the fullness of the glory of God, the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. As we put on the new man, as we become transformed to the image of Christ, He is giving us new life. And that is all a process of one day at a time, saying, can I just get a little bit closer to the measure of Christ? Can I become a little bit more like Jesus in His humility, in His kindness, in His patience, in His love? And as we go about this process from day to day, focusing on not the big picture, but the small picture, the little things, the little habits and details of our life. As we focus on that, God does an amazing miracle in our life. We become His workmanship. And yes, the result of that can be a better family. That blessing, the fruit of that transformation can be seen in the relationships we share with the other members of our families as husbands and wives, as parents and as children. And what we're going to focus on tonight is the husband. We talked about wives and their responsibility to submit to their husbands, to display the perfect meekness of Christ, and to preach the gospel as they show this kind of character of Christ, even winning unbelieving husbands without a word. We're now going to consider the passage in Ephesians that specifically speaks to the husbands. As I said this morning, 1 Peter has only one verse to the husbands. Well, in Ephesians, there are only 3 verses for the wives. The majority of the text is directed toward the husbands. And just as the wives were challenged this morning to become more like Christ, it is the husbands that are given that responsibility, the example of Christ in Ephesians chapter 5. And so let's read the end of Ephesians 5, beginning in verse 22. We'll read down to the end of the chapter. Ephesians 5:22. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, His body, and is Himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church, and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound. And I'm saying it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. As I said with the wives this morning, the same admonition Peter is making to wives, he makes to husbands. These are unconditional commitments. Wives are not told to submit to their husbands if their husbands are really nice to them. He says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. It's not about your husband. It's about the Lord. That's the reason why you submit. And then he says, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Of course, we give the disclaimer, we ought to obey God rather than men. But Paul doesn't even feel the need to give that disclaimer. He understands, his audience should understand. If your husband tells you to do something that's wrong, you follow God, you follow Christ, you don't follow your husband. But he's not focusing on the exception, he's focusing on the rule. Even if your husband is a jerk, even if your husband is a fool, if he's not calling on you to do something that is sinful against God, you are to submit to him. This commitment to submission is unconditional. But so is the instruction given to the husband. He doesn't say to husbands, love your wives. If that's all he said, boy, that would be a dream for us. We can define that love however we want to. But he doesn't give us the luxury of defining what love for our wife looks like, or what it is, what it entails. He says, love your wives how? Just as much as Christ did the church. Jesus didn't die for us because we were lovely. Jesus didn't die for us because we were submissive to him. Jesus didn't die for us because we were worthy of his love. He died for us even when we were yet sinners. And so even if your wife is sinning against you, even if she's broken promises to you, even if she has been hateful, speaking about you unfairly, or saying things about your behind your back that are not right, your duty and your responsibility is to love her. It's unconditional. To the extent that Jesus loved us when we were unlovable, you husbands must love your wives. It's unconditional. Again, marriage is not a 50-50 proposition. It's 100% unconditional. When I have premarital Bible studies with a couple that I'm going to perform their marriage ceremony, I tell them, there may come a time. Now we're going to talk about these vows, and this is what you're promising to do. But there may come a time in your life where you look back and you say, you know what, this may have been a big mistake. I'm not so sure I should have married this person. That does not release you from your vow. You have made a promise. You have made a promise to God. And you've got to keep that promise unconditionally. And so it's not about us. It's not about our happiness. It's about the Lord. And it's about our holiness. It's about being faithful to our God. What does he mean when he says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her? Now, obviously, it's saying that Jesus literally died on a cross. What does that mean, though, to you and me? I think most husbands, even husbands that don't know the Lord, if you were to ask them, would you give your life for your wife? If somebody came into your home brandishing a weapon and they're about ready to shoot, would you throw yourself in harm's way to protect your wife? I think most husbands, at least theoretically, of course you never know until that moment arrives. I think in theory most husbands would say, yes, I would give my life to protect my wife. Is that what Paul's talking about here? That would be a one-time sacrifice. What Paul is talking about here is an ongoing sacrifice, something that you do every day. We may be willing to sacrifice our bodies for our wives, but would we be willing to sacrifice our pride? What if the threat to our marriage is not external from an enemy outside the home, but internal? What if the threat is not physical, a thief threatening with a gun, but spiritual, where our wife is the one with the gun, taking verbal shots at us? Would we be willing to sacrifice ourselves then? When Paul says that we must love our wives as Christ loved the church, which of these two scenarios do you think most closely resembled the one he had in mind? Again, the bullet is what you only do one time. That's a sacrifice you can only make once. I think Paul had something that we do day in, day out. Christ gave himself up for his bride. And we talked about this earlier. What was the posture of Jesus when he did that? Is this a defensive posture? No, this is a defensive posture. This right here is completely exposed and vulnerable. Are we willing to expose ourselves to our wives and make ourselves vulnerable for her good? Are we willing to do that just as Jesus did that for us? Would you be willing to love your wife like this? She's unkind, she's unthankful, she's unresponsive to our needs, she's sending passive-aggressive darts, verbal assaults, disrespectful. What did Peter say about Jesus when he was hanging on the cross? When he was reviled, what did he do? He reviled not in return. When he suffered, he did not what? Threaten. You're bigger than your wife. You're stronger than her. You're going to let her talk to you that way? I know what the world would tell you. Don't let her disrespect you. You show her who's boss. You put her in her place. Is that what Jesus did? Which standard are we being held up to? There was a man years ago that I know, that was a good friend, that he committed adultery against his wife. And thankfully, his wife was trying to work things out with him. She had a hard time, but she was willing to work. And we were encouraging this man, my friend, to try to do the things that he needed to do to restore trust in a relationship. And we talked about the emotional bank account. And listen, when you are unfaithful to your wife, you have just gone into negative territory. And it's going to take a long time to get that back. But we were telling him there's all kinds of practical ways that you can love her and serve her and be kind to her. Do extra chores around the house. Put her needs first. And so he was doing all of those things. I believe he was sincerely trying. But after a month or so, he told me, he said, David, this just isn't working. She doesn't seem to believe that what I'm doing is real. She says that I'm just doing these things because you're telling me to do them. I said, yeah, I can see that. He said, I'm not getting any kind of appreciation. I'm not getting any kind of feedback. All I'm getting is judged over here. He's like, how long am I going to have to do this? I don't think he got it. Do you? How long? What's the standard that we as husbands are given? And by the way, Jesus did not sin against us. He was not put on the cross because he had done something to us and we were getting our revenge. He did no sin. Neither was deceit found in his mouth. Jesus was the only husband who was truly innocent. And yet we look over with judgment at our wife and say, well, she doesn't deserve my love. How long am I going to have to do this? As long as it takes. Unconditionally. These roles are unconditional. This is what you promised on your wedding day. This is what you vowed. We are being called to put on Christ. That is the goal. Whether or not it works or not is really beside the point. Whether this helps your marriage flourish and grow, and by the way, I believe that it will. It's not a guarantee, but if you put on the character of Christ, things will most likely get better. But even if they don't, you do it anyway. Because it's not about our happiness. It's about becoming more like Christ. And we're leading with a purpose. Why did Jesus die on the cross for us? It wasn't for our physical good. It was for our spiritual good. That He might sanctify her, having cleansed her with the washing of water by the Word. That He might present her to Himself without blemish. That she might be holy and without blemish. That was the reason why Jesus died on the cross. What's the goal for us? Well, the goal for us personally is that we might become more like Christ. What's the goal for your wife in loving her in this way? It's the same. The reason why we love her is not so that we can get something back from her. It's so that she might become more like Christ. As you help her become like Christ, of course, you're helping yourself. You're blessing yourself. But again, it's not about the results. It's about the process. Our main objective, our main goal should be to help our wife get to heaven. As the spiritual leader of our home, that is our goal. How can you, as a husband, help your wife to become more like Christ? We talked to the wives this morning about being an Abigail. We talked about Abigail earlier Friday night. You can be an Abigail. I know it's a little weird to think of it in reverse, but you can be the Abigail in your relationship. You can humble yourself like she humbled herself. You can serve your wife as she served. You can take ownership of the situation as she took ownership. You remember what she said to David? On me alone be the guilt. Are we man enough in whatever conflict we're engaged in to take ownership and say, you know what? The blame is with me. It's my fault. Looking to ourselves first. I'm not saying we overlook sin. I'm not saying we gloss over things that our wife does. I'm saying that we take personal responsibility. And we say, I'm going to take ownership of this, just as Abigail did, accepting the weight of responsibility for what is happening. On me alone be the guilt. And by the way, Abigail did rebuke David. But it was probably the most gentle tongue lashing you will ever read. By reminding David of God's purposes for his life. It wasn't about her and her safety. It wasn't even about Nabal or the servants. It was David, I'm trying to save you from yourself. She wasn't hand on hip, waving her finger at him and saying, who do you think you are coming onto my property, violating my rights? You need to go back home, David, and get over yourself. That's not what she did. That's not what she said. She said, the Lord has promised to make of you a sure house. The Lord will appoint you as prince over Israel, as He has promised. It was all about the Lord. Can we approach conflict in the same way as husbands? Or do we get in the way? That was a question Saturday morning in the men's study. Somebody asked, how do we get in the way of what God is wanting to accomplish? A lot of times for us as husbands, it's just our pride. We are so determined that we are right. We can't even see the big picture. And even when we are right, we're wrong because we're approaching it in the wrong way. We need to step outside of ourselves, step outside of the relationship and think, what is the problem here? What does the Lord want us to do? How does the Lord want me to lead my wife, help my wife? It's going to begin by humbling myself. It's going to begin by not picking out the speck in her eye, but looking at the plank in my own eye. It's going to begin by me taking ownership of what I have done, of me being the spiritual leader, being the adult in the room when we're playing these childish games. It's our responsibility to resolve conflicts in the home. And let me just say that again, to you as a husband, to me as a husband. When there is a problem in the home, when there's a conflict, it's not up to our wives. We should not take the weak, spineless, cowardly way out and say, well, she'll get over it. She's just emotional. It's not my problem. Yeah, I wasn't exactly right in how I said that, and maybe I was a little too strong, but I'm just going to go over to my corner. I'm going to go find my man cave. I'm going to go out in the woods and go hunting and just get away for a while and just go out. No, it's our responsibility. We don't run from an enemy. If an intruder comes in your home, you don't say to the wife and kids, hey, I'm getting out over here. Y'all, good luck. When an intruder comes in your home, as a man, you face it. When the devil is involved in our marriages, it's not up to our wife to be the one to fix the problem. But so often it's the wife who is coming to the elders. It's the wife who is coming to the preacher. It's the wife who is going to a counselor. It's the wife who is urging the husband, hey, we need to do something about this. That's not her job. It's our job. We are the spiritual leader. We should be the one who is stepping up and saying, hey, this is something that concerns the Lord. It's not just about my pride. It's not just about my inconvenience. It's not just about our relationship. It's about the Lord. And I'm going to stand up. And I'm going to do whatever I have to do to make things right. And lead by example, not by edict. Not by trying to shout down our wife and prove to her how wrong she is. No, we need to take the responsibility and be the Abigail to reconcile and to bring peace and harmony back to the home, because it's about the Lord. And so we've got to keep that in mind. Our primary objective is, am I helping my wife become more like Christ or less like Christ? Am I helping her get to heaven, or am I encouraging her to go to hell? That should be the question we ask ourselves as we look at ourselves in the mirror every day. What do our wives need from us? In verse 28, he says, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. He says in verse 29, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. We talked about this last night and a little bit this morning. But we need to lead our wives in prayer. There was a man I know very well whose wife told me, confessed to me on one occasion, that her husband, who was a very godly man, Bible teacher, was very comfortable leading the congregation in public prayer, but he just didn't feel comfortable praying with his wife. And he said it just felt awkward for him. It was very uncomfortable for him to be that vulnerable and that open with his wife. He prayed personally all the time, but he just could not bring himself to pray with his wife, even though she needed that. If it is uncomfortable for you to do this with your wife, I don't know how to say this other than to say you just need to get over it. You need to get over your embarrassment. Your wife needs this. She's probably told you that she does, like Adrian told me. And if she hasn't told you, she's probably just afraid to ask you. But don't wait for your wife to ask. What happens when we lead our wives in prayer? Look over at Philippians chapter 4. Just turn over a few pages. What we're doing for our wives is we're nourishing and cherishing them. What kind of nourishment is Paul talking about in Ephesians chapter 5? Is it physical nourishment? No, he's talking about spiritual and emotional nourishment. Ephesians 4 and verse 4 says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." We need to guard the hearts and the minds of our wives. What is threatening the hearts and the minds of our wives? Well, it's the lies of the devil. The devil coming in and intruding, coming into our home. We talked about the intruder coming in with a gun. The devil is coming into our wives' hearts and telling her all kinds of lies about herself and about you and about your feelings toward her and about the children and about threats that are causing anxiety and stress for her. We can relieve her of a lot of that stress by allowing God to be the guard for her heart that He wants to be. We need to be talking to our wives and asking her, what's going on? What's wrong? I told you my confession that when we were in Tuscaloosa and things had become really hectic and really stressful for Adrienne, and she told me, I need this. What we started doing is we started going, we were both really busy, and so the best time we could do it is just get up early. We got up an hour earlier every day, and we would go for a walk, and we would talk, and we would pray. And I learned a lot on those long walks with Adrienne. I learned a lot about what she was stressed out over, what she was feeling. And sometimes we never get down to those feelings. We just see the surface problems. We know what the surface problems are. We know what the simple stressors are. But we don't know what are the feelings beneath those problems. And we can't really uncover those things until we spend time with them. We're going to talk about time in just a minute. We got to spend time with them. And we got to ask them and delve deep into what those emotions are. And then once those things are exposed, bring them to the throne of grace. And God has promised to give us what we need, to give our wives what they need. We need to guard our wives' hearts and not leave them exposed to the devil. Again, that is our job. Spiritual leadership is not just some title that's given to us. It's a responsibility. It's a burden that we have to bear. We have to carry that. God has given us. God has given us that responsibility. Most men will go to the father and ask for their daughter's hand in marriage. Who was the first man to give away the first woman in marriage? It wasn't a father, it wasn't an earthly father. It was God. God gave Eve to the man. What did that mean? The man was responsible of taking care of the stewardship God had given her. And that's not the last time. Every time a woman is given in marriage, who gave your father-in-law your wife? God. God gave that little baby. When she came into the world as this little girl, God gave that baby to the father. And now He is taking the responsibility God has given him and He's handing it to you. It's our responsibility to take that stewardship seriously. There's nothing that God is more concerned about than the spiritual well-being of our wives. Taking care of the finances, that's important. That's critical. If we don't do that, we've denied the faith worse than an unbeliever. We've got to do that. But there's so much more to being the leader of the home than just providing food on the table. So again, husbands, ask your wives, what's going on in your life? And then pray with them. Spend time with them. And let's say something about time management. We talked about redeeming the time. You may be familiar with the TV show Undercover Boss. You ever watched Undercover Boss before? It's a show about a man or a woman who owns a company, and they go down in disguise, undercover, to work in the factory with everybody else. They go down to the floor where all the widgets are being made. and they come in just as someone who happens to be a new employee or something, and they work alongside everybody else for a period of time. And at the end of the show, there's the big reveal where the CEO comes in with his coat and tie and says, "Hey, I actually own the company." What do the employees get out of that? Well, they get a sense that their CEO really wants to understand what their life is like. That he wants to have empathy for what they're dealing with. What does the CEO get out of that? He gets something so much more meaningful than just reports that he reads in his corner office. He gets something so much more than impersonal surveys that he receives from employees. He gets to see what it's really like. Do you understand that that's exactly the reason why Jesus became a man? I mean, he became a man so that he might suffer and die, right? That is true. But Jesus came down to this earth so that he might show empathy to us. Jesus stopped when blind Bartimaeus was calling out to him. He stopped. He made time for him. And what he did is he listened to him so that he might be that merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God. Hebrews 2 and verse 17. Hebrews 7 and verse 25 says that he always lives to make intercession for them. Which is to say that Jesus has no other job. He is seated at the right hand of God, and he has no other job than to listen to us. We never pray to God, and Jesus says, "Hold on a minute, I'm busy." Jesus never says that to us. He's always there, 24/7, 365. Jesus is never too busy. Jesus has demonstrated as a faithful high priest, he became a man so that when we go to him with our temptations and our trials, he can say to the Father, "This is what they're dealing with, and I know what that's like. I know what it feels like to be betrayed. I know what it feels like when people mock you or make fun of you. I know what it feels like to be hungry and to go without and to be poor." He experienced all of those things that he might be that faithful high priest. We must follow the example of Jesus as husbands and try to not just listen on a surface level way, but to listen with the intent of truly understanding what our wives are trying to say. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, Proverbs 18 and verse 2, but only in expressing his opinion. And it's taken me 30 years to figure out that I'm just not a good listener. I'm not. I admit it. That's only part of the solution. I mean, it's a big step in the right direction. But I realize that I'm not a good listener. I don't listen to Adrian. And I need to do a better job. I'm always eager to jump in and tell Adrian why she's wrong, what she needs to understand. I need to listen to understand what she's saying before I have any word to say. The purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, Proverbs 20 and verse 5. But a man of understanding will draw it out, which is more than just a question. What's wrong? The question needs to be followed up with another question, followed up with another question, and another question. That's what a man of wisdom will do. Are we willing to do that? Are we as husbands willing to sacrifice our time, our precious time? And I know we're busy. I know you're busy. But are we too busy to stop what we're doing and listen patiently, asking the kinds of questions to kind of get beyond just the surface level problem to what the real issue is? And she's not going to tell you what the real issue is until she trusts that you really mean it when you say, "What's going on?" And oh, by the way, is it me? You got to mean it. Don't be defensive. Don't be ready to fight. Again, ask sincerely, "What's going on? What can I do to help?" As was said this morning, we need to do more than 1%. I've got 100 things I need to work on as a husband. But is there one thing tonight from this lesson that you can look at and say, "You know what? I really need to do better with that"? Maybe it's prayer. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's listening. Maybe it's communication. Maybe it's, I need to put down the phone when I come home at the end of the day. And you know what I need? I need to just shut it off. We talked about the 21-day fast from social media. Maybe when I come home, I just need to get away from my phone so that no one can distract me, and I can give my undevoted attention to my wife. I can give my undevoted attention to my kids. Maybe that's what you and I need to do. Whatever it is, why not commit tonight that you're going to do that one thing and see what God does in this transformation that He's seeking to bring about us to become more like Christ. Jesus is a faithful high priest, and He wants to be your high priest. Understand that if you're not a child of God, you don't have that advocate with the Father. He doesn't intercede for you the way He intercedes for the child of God. Why not accept the grace that God has offered you? Make Him your husband. Become His wife. Become His bride. And begin this process of transformation where when He hears your prayers, He responds by going to the Father and helping you become more and more like Him every day. If you're not a child of God, ready to repent of your sins and confess your faith and be baptized, why don't you come as together we stand and sing.